There's Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Zevachim Daf Pevov, number 86. Look how far we've come. Baruch Hashem. Okay, we're going to start from Daf Pei Hey Amid Beis, and let us read from the bottom, the Mishnah. So the Mishnah begins, Ve'elu im olu yerdu. Till now, we've discussed things that end up on the Mizbeach, and the Mishnah told us that you leave them there. So certain tumas, certain psulim that happen to land on the Mizbeach, right? A certain psulim that we had in the Mishnayos before that landed on the Mizbeach, then just leave the meat on the Mizbeach, let it burn there, don't take it off. The following, the following, im olu, if they end up on the Mizbeach, let's make it big. What does the Mishnah say? Yerdu, you take them off the Mizbeach, okay? And there are about 10 in this list, I think. Bisar koche kochim, the meat of koche kochim. The meat of koche kochim are, let's say, a carbon chatas. So you put the fats on the Mizbeach. The meat is supposed to be eaten by the kahanim. Let's say you put that meat back onto the Mizbeach. Wait a second, that's supposed to be eaten by the kahanim. You take it right off the Mizbeach. Ubsar kochikalim, or the meat of a kochikalim. Let's give an example of a kochikalim. Your carbon pesach, right? You sprinkle it on the Mizbeach, and after you're supposed to take the body of the animal home, roast it. What happens if you put that roasted animal, that animal on the Mizbeach? Don't leave it there. Take it off the Mizbeach. Umoisar ha'omer, the leftover of an omer. An omer is the carbon mincha that they made out of barley, and they put the koimitz. Hi, we just began. We're on Pei Hey Amid Beis, on by the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is the listing off things that end up on the Mizbeach. You've got to take them off the Mizbeach. So one of the things is called a moisar ha'omer, the leftover of an omer. The omer was you did a kmitza on this omer, and you put that on the Mizbeach, and the rest of the barley meal was divided up to the kahanim to be eaten in the kodesh kadosh, in the Beis Hamikdash. If that ended up on the Mizbeach, you take it off the Mizbeach. You don't burn it. You just take it off the Mizbeach. Ushtei alechem, the two big breads that were eaten by the Kahanim in the Beis Hamikdash during Shavuos time, after they brought the kvasim, certain sheeps. That's chometz. I mean, it's not even supposed to be ended up on the Mizbeach. If somehow somebody put it on the Mizbeach, don't burn it on the Mizbeach. Take it off the Mizbeach. Or v'lechem haponim, or the lechem haponim. You're familiar with the showbread that was supposed to be distributed to the kahanim. So if somebody put his showbread onto the mizbeach, again, you take it off the mizbeach. We've learned that there's certain things that you put on the mizbeach, and Hashem said, "Oh, you put it in front of me, leave it on the mizbeach. I'll take it. I'll eat it." But here, they're following things that if you put it on the mizbeach, you got to take it off the mizbeach. Ushiyare menachas, the leftover of a mincha. As you can see, a mincha is a flour offering, right? Like this. This flour offering, as you can see in the picture. After they took the kamitza and they put it onto a kli sharetz, the kamitza gets poured onto the mizbeach. As you can see in the picture, he brings this little piece, pours it on the mizbeach. The rest of it was baked into like achila sheshrayim, was baked into matzah or something. But what happens if you put these things onto the mizbeach? The Mishnah says, take it off the mizbeach. Give it to the kahanim to eat. V'ha ketoris, and ketoris is the incense, and that really belonged on the inside mizbeach. What happens? Somebody put the ketoris on the outside mizbeach. Take it off. Don't burn it on the inside mizbeach. Now the Mishnah brings a list of things that you could bring it onto the mizbeach. You could bring it onto the mizbeach as long as it's connected to a piece of meat. But if it's disconnected, then you don't bring it onto the mizbeach. So you'll see atzemer shabarashi kvasim, the wool, that's the wool from a sheep that's on the head of the sheep. Normally, the skin of the sheep you skin the animal and give it to the kohen, but the head was not skinned, and normally the head was thrown onto the mizbeach uh, and burned. So the wool that was on that head is also thrown onto the mizbeach. V'seor shebeskan ad yoshim, and the little goatee that's in the male goats, on the beard of the male goats. V'atzomos, let's say a bone. V'agidim, sinus, v'karnayim, and horns, v'atlafayim, and a hoof. So all these things are ancillary to the meat, right? So even if they're a carbon oila, what should you do with them? So should you put it onto the mizbeach to be burnt? So bisman shehei mechubarim. Let's say if they're still connected to the animal, let's say the hoof is connected to the animal, yalu, then you bring it onto the mizbeach because it says by a korban oila v'hiktir hakoyin as hakoil. He burns everything onto the mizbeach. Pershu, but if it got separated, somehow it fell off, the hoof fell off, or the horns fell off, or one of the bones fell out, lo yalu, then you don't put it on to the mizbeach separately. Shenema, Pasuk says, va'asisa oilesecha, what you for the carbon oila, you put on habasa, just the meat, v'hadam, and the blood, but not bones, and not the hooves, and not the horns. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, you put everything onto the mizbeach. The rabbis, that includes ha'atzomois, v'agidim, v'karnayim, v'atlafayim. That all these things, the bones, the sinews, the horns, and the hooves, if they're all connected to this animal, throw it onto the mizbeach, because that's what a carbon oil is. Everything gets burnt on the mizbeach. Yochel, I would have thought, I feel a pershu, even if it got separated, even if the hoof fell off and it's a separate piece, Talmud, I would put it onto the mizbeach by itself. Talmud loima v'sisa oilosecha basav adam. Only the meat and blood get put onto the mizbeach. I basav adam. If it's just meat and the blood get put on the mizbeach. If you look at that pasuk, yochal, I would have thought we go to the top of Pevav and Aleph, Yachlitz Gidim Atzomis. Then you should never put any bone on the Mizbeach. You should debone the animal before you put it onto the Mizbeach, before you burn it on the Mizbeach. The Yala Bosa, Legabim Mizbeach, only put meat on the Mizbeach. Talmud Loima, but the Pasuk says, Hashem says, V'hikta koyin asakol, put everything on the Mizbeach. So how do you resolve these psukim? One pasuk says you put the bones, one pasuk says you put everything, and one pasuk says you put only the meat on the mizbeach. So that's the answer. Muchubarim, if they're connected, yalu, you put it on the mizbeach. Pershu, but if it fell off, if the bones fell off, or the hooves or the horns fell off, even if it's already on top of the mizbeach. Let's say you're about to put the head of the korban onto the mizbeach, and all of a sudden the horn fell off. Yerdu, don't put it on the mizbeach. You just take it down. So that's the pshat, and that's how it's every resolved. So who is the author of our Mishnah? Mantana, who's the author? The Shamat Lei, the Omar, that you heard in a brisa that he says Pirshu. If the hooves get separated, if the bones get separated, yerdu, you just take it off the mizbeach. Rebbe, that's the author is Rebbe. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. This Tanakama, this is the Chachamim. They disagree with Rebbe because look what they say. They have to deal with this stiras hapsukim, the contradiction. First, the pasuk says v'hiktir hakoyin es hakoil hamizbecha, put everything on mizbeach. L'rabos, that includes v'atzomos, bones, v'agidim, sinus, v'kanayim, and horns, v'atlafayim, and hooves. Afilu pirshu. The Chacham says even if it fell apart, even if the whole animal fell apart and the bones all over the place, put them all on the mizbeach. That's the Chachamim. But then what did the Chachamim do with this pasuk that only meat and blood should be on the mizbeach? That teaches you ikuli oila atamachzer. If the bones somehow flew off the pyre, let's say it popped off the fire of the mizbeach, it just fell off, then you return it. If the meat falls off, then you return it. But if the bone, sinews, or the horns just fell off the mizbeach, then you don't return it. In other words, only things the pasuk is just telling you, only if the meat falls off the fire, gets popped out of the fire, you put it back on. But if the bone, which you initially put on the fire, got popped off the fire, you don't put it back on. That's the way the Chachamim learned. So the Chachamim learned that bones, technically, and horn and hooves, even if it's separate, you just throw it on the fire initially. Rebbe says not so. The Torah tells you put everything on the mizbeach. Then the Torah says only put the meat in the blood. Meat, that's a limitation. How do you resolve the two psukim? Like our Mishnah did. Muchubarim, if they're connected, yalu, then you put them on the mizbeach. Pirshu, if they separated, afile hein b'roisha mizbeach, even if they're on top of the mizbeach, if the hoof fell off the leg, and even if you're about to throw the bone onto the hoof, the leg onto the fire, if the hoof fell off, yerdu, you take it off the mizbeach. Omar Rab Zera commented on the shita of the Chachamim. The Chachamim say everything belongs on the mizbeach, even if bones, even if it's separate. However, if it popped off the fire and fell off the mizbeach, then a bone you don't put back on. The meat you do put back on. So Amar Rab Zera said, Lo shanu el shapir sheklapi mata. Even if the bone popped off, if it fell off towards the bottom, it fell off the mizbeach, towards the floor. Aval klapi mala, but if it fell off towards the upwards, I guess towards the upper part of the fire, it's getting closer to it being no, I'm sorry. Loishon, it's going back on Rebbe. Rebbe said that if it fell off, if it's separate, you're on top of the mizbeach, right? And the hoof fell off. If the hoof fell off, that's it. Don't put it on the mizbeach. But only if the hoof fell off, let's say towards the ramp side, then you don't put it back on the mizbeach. You don't put it on the mizbeach initially. Ava klapi ma'ala, but if it fell off towards the direction of the fire, kruvi hu de'akrive li'ikol, it's getting closer to the fire, even Rebbe would agree that you put it initially on the fire. So again, Rebbe says that if the hoof falls off, don't put it on the fire. However, it depends what direction it fell off. If it fell off towards the ramp, let's say, then of course you don't put it on the fire. But if the hoof fell towards the direction of the fire, so then even Rebbe would agree, you pick up the hoof and you put it on the fire. Now, Vafilu Pirshu, the Chachamim say that no matter what, you always put everything on the fire. You put everything on the fire, even if it fell apart, no matter what, you pick up all the bones and everything, and even if it's separate pieces, and you put it on the fire. Amar Rabba said, Hachi Kamar. This is what the Chachamim meant. Loi shanu el shapir shel achazrika. If after the zrika sadam, the whole meat and the bones fell apart, then you put it all on the mizbeach. Aval pirshu koydem zrika. If the whole meat and bones fell apart and the horns fell off before the zrika, so that's very interesting. As zrika usharisinhu. The zrika made it permitted. Afilu lemevid minei kata de sakina. You can now use the bone as a handle to a knife. In other words, when it was part and parcel with the meat, if it's connected to the meat, and then you did the zrika, so then you really technically have to put it onto the mizbeach on the fire. But if the bone separated from the meat prior to the zrika, then the bone was never really holy. It's not really something supposed to be put on the fire. And therefore, once you do the zrika, you can do whatever you want with the bone, even to make it a handle for a knife. Savala, Giha, the Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi held like Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, that bones are permitted. You're allowed to do whatever you want with the bones. It's yours. Nema lo yeh ba'oila. It says it should be yours for the oil. It says by the skin, it belongs to the kohen. V'nema lo yeh ba'asham. By asham, it says by the meat, the meat belongs to the kohen by a carbon asham. Ma asham, just like by an asham, the meat and atzmois of the bones, mutarim, are permitted for the kohen. Af oila, so also by an oila, atzamois mutarim, the bones are permitted. When are the bones permitted? If they separated from the meat prior to the zrika. So that's the source. And mufni, and this is a gzeira shava that's really open. The Eloi mufni, because if it wasn't a clear gzeira shava, I could ask you a question. Ma la oshim shekaim b'sari muta. The reason why the bones are mutter by an asham, because the meat is mutter by an asham. The meat by an oil is never mutter, so why should the bones be mutter? But a gzeira shava is a gzeira shava. Loyia, you say there's an extra loyia by a oila, because it could have said or ha'oila shehikrav lakoyin. It doesn't have to repeat loyia; it belongs to him, so it's extra. The point being, again, Rabba's opinion is that although according to the Chachamim, if the bones and the meat separate, you put it onto the mizbeach, you put it onto the fire. That's only if they separated after the zrika. But let's say they came apart before the zrika, then after you do the zrika, all you have to do is put the meat on the mizbeach. The bones, you could even use it as your handle for your knife. You could use it as a toothpick. Masiv Rav Ze'ada Barahava, Rav Ada Barahava asked on Rabba, Atzmas Kedoshim Lefnei Zrika Me'alim Behem, Acha Zrika Ein Me'alim Behem, the bones of regular kachim that after Zrika you don't do Mi'ila, before Zrika you get Mi'ila, Vishel Oila, the bones of a carbon Oila, Me'alim Behem La'oilam, they're also to use for your own personal use, forever. So, isn't that a question against Rabbah? Because Rabbah said that the bones, if they were separated from the meat prior to the zrika, you could use it for your personal usage. So answers the Gemara, Ema, you have to repeat you have to put into the brisa, Vishel Oila, depends. Pershu lifnei zrika, if they came apart from the meat before the zrika, Ein mayalim behem, you don't get mi'ila. La'acha zrika mayalim behem, after the zrika, you do get mi'ila. Upliga the Rabbi Lazar. Rabba argued against Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said, Pershu lifnei zrika, if they came apart before zrika, mayalim behem, you do get mila. You can't use it for whatever you want. La'acha zrika, but if they came apart after the zrika, so then, according to Rabbi Lazar, so if they came apart after the zrika, loy nehenen, you're not allowed to have a gnaw from it, midrabanan. V'loy me'alin, but you don't have me'ila in it because he has the gzeir shava. V'loy yiyava asham, and asham is after zrika. It's the meat and bones are permitted to the kahanim. So also after the zrika, there's no me'ila by these bones technically, but still you have to put it onto the mizbeach. Okay, next Mishnah. The kulan, all these psulim that ended up onto the mizbeach, shepaku. Let's say they popped off the mizbeach, me'alga mizbeach, lo yaksar. So a pasula carbon that ended up on the mizbeach, you don't take it off. But if it popped off, if the fire just shot it off the mizbeach, then don't put it back on the mizbeach. The chain, and the same holds true, gacheles, a piece of coal from the fire on the mizbeach, shepaka me'al gaba mizbeach, that fell off the mizbeach, lo yachzir, don't return it back. Then the Mishnah said, evarim, limbs that you are burning on the mizbeach, shepaku ma'al gaba mizbeach, that popped off the fire koidim chatzos before midnight, yachzir, you could return it onto the fire. Umayalam behem, and you're not allowed to use it for your personal use, and you get mi'ila. La'acha katzos, but if it popped off the fire of the mizbeach after midnight, lo yachzer, you don't return it. The ein ma'alim behem, you don't do mi'ila. So if after 1 o'clock in the morning something pops off the mizbeach, the Mishnah says you don't have to return it onto the fire, and you don't have mi'ila. Kishem sham mizbeach mekadesh es royaloi kacha keves mekadesh. That just like the mizbeach makes a puzzle of carbon, you tell the puzzle of carbon leave it on the mizbeach, even if it only ended up on the ramp, you leave it there. You don't take it off the mizbeach. And Shem Shamizbeach Vakeves Mekachim Nesaroy Lehem Kacha Kalim Mekachim. That just like the Mizbeach and the ramp make it holy, it's certain klishares that you put, like you put something already, a puzzle. Let's say you put a puzzle of thing into the klishares, which is this. You put the puzzle of kamitza into the klishares already. That's mekadesh it, and then you have to continue the service. So the Gemara said, "Hey Chadami." The Gemara begins and says, "What's talking about a piece of meat popped off the fire of the base of the mizbeach before midnight?" And we're saying that if after midnight it falls off the mizbeach, you don't have to return it. The question is, if this is a real piece of meat, if it falls off the mizbeach after midnight, return it. The mitzvah is that you should turn this piece of meat into ashes, and it wasn't turned into ashes. So even if it fell off the mizbeach 2:00 in the morning, return it. Either less by mamish, and even if we're talking about a piece of meat that already turned into ashes, then afilu koydem chatzois nami. Then if it fell off the mizbeach before midnight, why do you have to return it? It's ashes already. So why should I return it? So what is the Mishnah talking about? The Mishnah is talking about, we go to Amid Beis, Bishriri, something in the middle, that it's a piece of meat that's dried out and it's hard, it's unedible, but it's not ashes. So if it falls off the Mizbeach before midnight, return it back on. After midnight, you don't have to return it back on. So, Menahani Mili, how do I know there's a concept of midnight in the Beis HaMikdash? So the Gemara says, Amarav, Kosav Echad Oimed, there's one pasuk says, Kol Halayla Vehiktar. You burn the meats on the Mizbeach the entire night. The Ksiv, the pasuk Echad Oimed, one pasuk says, Kol Halayla Vehirim. The entire night you could do Truma Sadeshin, which means separating a little bit of the ashes off the fire. So, are you supposed to be burning things on the Mizbeach all night? Or you're supposed to be separating, doing Truma Sadeshin the whole night? So, Chalkeyu, you divide it in half. Chetzi lahaktar, the first half of the night is designated only for being maktar, burning something on the Mizbeach. Chetzi laharama, and the second half, following 12 o'clock at night, then you could do Truma Sadeshin. So that's the idea that the Gemara is thinking now, is that once something like a shriri, a type of piece of dried out meat that's not edible but it's burnt, that fell off the mizbeach after chatzos, you pass the time lapse of being maktarit, and now begins the time where you separate. You do the truma sadeshin. So it comes out that you're supposed to do truma sadeshin midnight. So now the Gemara asks one question, and then we'll stop. Mosav Rav Kahana, you're telling me that 12 o'clock was the first time you could do the Truma Sadeshin. Mosav Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana asks, B'chol yoim, every day, Toyer Mizbeach, they would take a piece of ashes off the Mizbeach, and if you remember, Truma Sadeshin, you say it every day in davening. You take Truma Sadeshin, some of the ashes from the Mizbeach, put it on the side of the Mizbeach, and somehow the ashes disappeared in the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. But when did they do it? They did it by dawn, or very close to Alois Shachar. Milfonov or Ma'achav, a little before, a little afterwards. B'Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur, when it's a busy day, the next day, they did the Truma Sadeshin b'Chatzois by midnight. B'Regalim, when Yontiv, so they had a lot of people bringing karbonas, so they decided to do the Truma Sadeshin not from 4 o'clock in the morning, not from 12 o'clock in the middle of the night, but already by Shmai Rishonim, let's say by 10 o'clock at night, they did the Truma Sadeshin. The Isal Kadaitach, but you just told me, Mechatzois Daraisa, that the only time you could begin to do Truma Sadeshin is only from midnight. How were they allowed to do it any earlier than midnight? So what the Gemara is going to answer is like this. Trumas Hadeshin can be done any part of the night. Depending if you needed the time to start the service early, you can do it even at 10 o'clock at night. But when we're dealing with a piece of meat that didn't yet burn, that's a different story. That's not about Trumas Hadeshin or Hakdara. We're talking about a piece of meat called a shriri, and that could be a different time. If it falls off before midnight, you return it back onto the fire. After midnight, you don't have to return it back on the fire. So that midnight time clock is not talking about when you do Trumas Hadeshin or when you don't. That's talking about when you have to return the shriri onto the mizbeach or not. But Trumas Hadeshin can be done earlier. Rabbi Yochanan, that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Mimash mishenema kol alayla eni yedea ad aboika, ma tamad loima ad boika. That it's say hiu oila mizbeach kol alayla ad aboika. So why does it say aboika again? Of course, it says it should be the oil should be burning until the night. Why does it say it's the oil is burned on the mizbeach all night? Then it says leave it till the morning. Ma tamad loima ad boika. Why does the Torah tell you leave it till the morning? 10 boika lebakra shalayla. You could bring the morning even to the middle of the night. In other words, sometimes you could begin the Trumas Hadeshin as in the middle of the night as if it's morning. Hilkach, therefore, concludes the Gemara. Kol yoymei, every normal day, when did they do the Trumas Hadeshin? Mikrois Hageva Sagi. They did it from, let's say, 4 o'clock in the morning, from before dawn. B'yom Kippurim, and Yom Kippur, B'Shem Chulsha de Kohen Gadol has a lot of work to do that day. They started that process mechatzois from 12 o'clock in the midnight. Bergolim on Yontiv, the Nefishi Karbonis, many Jews are bringing Karbonis on Yontiv, the carbon oila re'iyah, the Kadmi Asu Yisrael, the Jewish people are starting to show up into the base of Migdash. Then they did the Trumas Hadeshin from 10 o'clock at night. Tani Sefer, like it says in the end of that Mishnah, Lo Hoisa Kriya Segev Magas on Yontiv, dawn didn't break, and the rooster didn't crow. Acha Azura Malayis Yisrael. The entire base of Mikdash was full of Jewish people there, and because of that, they were allowed to start the service early. Okay, and we'll continue with Pei Vav to Pei Zayin tomorrow, Bez Hashem.
Thank you.